Hello, and welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide that momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. I'm your host, Eric, and today we have Jeff Bogue in the house.
Hello, Eric Miller.
Jeff, how are you?
I am good. Very good.
You seem to be doing better since the sun is now shining in Northeast Ohio.
Well, we don't see it a lot up here, so every little bit helps.
I was thinking about this the other day. I think on most of our intros, you and I tend to just focus on the weather because it affects our mood.
It does. I remember years ago, my brother Dave moved to Northeast Ohio, and when he first got here, he commented to me. He goes, "You guys talk about the weather all the time," and I said, "Yeah." I said, "It's a big part of our life." Well, about a year later, I reminded him of that. He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You check the weather a lot." I'm like, "Yeah, it's like if you live in Atlanta, you check the traffic constantly. You live in Northeast Ohio, you check the weather constantly.
There you go.
And every place has its quirks."
Yep, that's true. That's true. I remember when my wife and I were debating on moving here, you were like, "It's amazing, it's gorgeous, it's wonderful." And then after we moved here, you're like, "It's terrible, the weather's awful."
Yeah,
Like,
I
what?
know. I know.
I see
I'm not
how
gonna
this
lead with that.
I see how this is. Okay, it's like that. Oh man.
What I'm more concerned about is that you actually debated moving.
Yeah.
I thought when I asked you to come do this with me, you were like, "What? My dreams have come true."
Yeah, we could stay in Maryland where there's real seafood.
Yeah, point well taken.
I've yet to have seafood in Northeast Ohio.
We have Red Lobster.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's dive into our topic here today, Jeff. We're talking about the pastoral crisis in America. This is becoming more of a thing. It's something that you and I are actually passionate about. It's something that we aligned our vision and ministry of Momentum kind of towards.
Yeah.
So we want to talk a little bit about this. We haven't really done an episode like this. And so with everything going on in the church right now, it's not just COVID. I know a lot of times we blame a lot of things on COVID.
Yeah.
But Jeff, let's give the listeners like just a understanding, a framework of what's going on. Maybe if they're unaware, maybe you're listening to this and you're not a pastor. Like what's kind of the backstory of this? How did God lead us to all this?
Yeah.
What are some of the stats and research even?
Well, it is a genuine crisis. So this isn't like a melodramatic statement. We have a severe problem in North America, and it's tied to burnout. It's tied to aging, and it's tied to like political climates, and frankly, it's tied to the secularization of a culture. So, what you have is this: Barna did research pre-COVID, and what they said in that research, this research is probably 4 or 5 years old now, but what they said is 85% of all pastors were going to be of retirement age in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So the bulk of the pastoral stock 5 years ago would have been like in their late 40s, early 50s, right? Which is actually, that would have been me. I'm 51. Yeah. I'll be 52 here in a couple weeks. So my generation, we're about 20 years from now, we're 65, 70. That's retirement age. So 85% of the present stock is going to be of retirement age. 50% of that 85% is going to be of retirement age in 10 years. Now, time has moved. So now we're probably talking about 15 or 16 years and 5 or 6 years.
Yep.
So that the alarm that they raised 4 or 5 years ago was, hey, the ministry stock, the pastoral stock, the people who are pastoring churches now, on staff now, is aging and aging rapidly. And the traditional institutions that produce pastors, Christian colleges, Christian seminaries, are not producing pastors. Yep. So young people are not going into the pastorate. Old people are getting old in the pastorate. and we're going to have a crisis. Then COVID hit.
Yep.
So then COVID hit. And if you're a pastor or a church leader, I don't even need to go into what COVID did, but it accelerated all of that with the tension, the stress, the shutdowns, the political divides, the social justice issues. Like, a lot of pastors didn't know what to do with that. A lot of pastors felt extreme stress and extreme pressure, and it accelerated burnout, it accelerated retirement. So a lot of guys who were like, I'm 65, but I'm going to do this for 5 more years, were like, I'm out. There was a lot of guys who were like, I'm not having a blast, but I want to stay faithful to it. They're like, I'm out.
I took a beating.
A lot of churches imploded. And then you get a guy like me, who serves in a healthy church, a large church, and I also possess what I call founding pastor privilege. Like, I kind of started the work that I lead locally. So I have as much support and as credibility as like a pastor can get, and I got the snot kicked out of me. So I'm like, I was in the most insulated place you could be. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, right? So that crisis accelerated a crisis.
Yep.
And if you are in a town anywhere in North America, you're watching church buildings go up for sale. You're watching church buildings become coffee shops and flea markets. And you're watching them be, if you're in the city, you're watching them be torn down and turned into parking lots for hospitals. You're watching mega churches sit empty. Here in Akron, there's a mega church. It actually has the largest auditorium in the city of Akron. And Akron is a large, mid-sized to large town in the Midwest, right? So we're not Atlanta, but we're not like, Podunkville. We're in the middle somewhere. We have a mega church, has a 3,000 seat auditorium, has 300,000 square feet under roof. So this thing is big. It is literally empty, and it is now been vandalized. It's been abandoned, and it's headed for a bulldozer.
Wow.
So that story times 10.
Yep.
So if you're a little church of 50 and you have a building that was paid for, so you still have like a presence in a building, the neighborhood has changed.
Yep.
Most of the people drive from the suburbs in or somewhere else in. You don't have another pastor. So here at Grace Church, where I pastor in Akron, Ohio, we start campuses. We have received 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 church buildings in the last 5 years of churches that are like, we don't know what to do. You can have our building. Can you restart something?
Wow.
And they've run out of money. The pastor had like his last gasp, and he retired or he moved on. And now there's those 50 or 100 people left. And that's part of why you're seeing churches close with such rapidness right now, is there's literally, now we took 7 buildings. We have 8 campuses right now. In our model, I could have 20 or 25 campuses if I had pastors.
Yes.
So if you've ever tried to replace a pastor, if you've tried to find a youth pastor, a worship pastor, like, they're not out there. And as a church leader who really wants to partner with other churches and cooperate, I can't help you because I'm probably looking for the same person myself. So people are dropping off rapidly. People are coming in very, very slowly. And in the middle, like, we're losing our footprint, so to say, in North America because there's nobody to lead.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I think one of the things that as we brainstormed this, COVID forced our hand as an organization a little bit where we weren't able to have our youth conference and some of the things that we would have normally done in that 2020 summer. And so let's kind of share that process. Like, what was our thinking as an organization? We're both local church pastors at heart, and yet we kind of took over this organization that in nature is a parachurch organization. And so for us, looking at that crisis that's going on, looking at the stats, understanding what you're facing with trying to hire campus pastors, worship pastors, youth pastors, how do we now sit as an organization to help be proactive and kind of raise up that next generation?
Yeah, when in 2019, when the board of what used to be called CE National started to ask me if I would be interested in being the president of CE National, I remember I flew to Los Angeles. They were having board meetings out there, and I said, here's the deal. I said, I would do this if CE National could become a leadership development organization. That's my passion, and that's the crisis that we're having. Mm-hmm. The board and Ed Lewis and TK and the team immediately got very excited about that because there's a lot of wisdom, in that room, and they were like, we see the crisis, that's what we need. Mm. So when I became president in January of 2020, I think before that I had reached out to you, or I can't remember exactly when we started talking, but when I started talking with you about coming and working with me, and when we started turning CE National into Momentum Ministry Partners, it was all looking and saying, we have to do our part to turn this tide.
Yeah.
We have to give a vision to young people of full-time ministry. We have to give a vision to them of being passionate marketplace leaders. Mm-hmm. Like, that vision isn't being cast.
Right.
They're being told to find their truth, live their dreams, and make a good living. And there's very few places where the vision of give your life away, serve the kingdom of God, lead the local church, whether vocationally or as an elder or lay leader, that vision wasn't happening. So we took what was given to us with Momentum and said, we want to turn that toward those efforts. Mm-hmm. Then COVID hit, mm-hmm. and like every other ministry, we had to hunker down. We had to get real lean, real mean, real fast, yep. right, to survive. God led us through all that. It's amazing, His provision. We made a lot of difficult changes. We got a lot of wonderful support. Mm-hmm. The people of God rallied. The people who were kind of like youth conference folks and Operation Barnabas folks, like if you recognize those old names, they rallied to us. And we became Momentum Ministry Partners. So we just had our team together. We probably spent 3 years getting through all that like everybody else did. Mm-hmm. Really press go on major vision this last year. And when we had our staff together, I said, guys, here's the deal. What we're going to do, or we're going to die trying, is we're going to raise up 3,000 pastors and 10,000 marketplace leaders in the next 20 years. Yeah. So we call it 3-10-20. And we're just looking and saying, in our little piece of time, on our little piece of dirt, like, we have to play this role, and we are going to have to be the people that put a call out to kids that say, giving your life to full-time ministry is a real career. Yep. It's a valid investment of your life, and God does use it in powerful ways. Yeah. And then we do that through Momentum Youth Conference, Momentum Travel Teams, Momentum Urban Centers, and then when kids say, I want to do that, we funnel them or steer them through what we call Momentum EDU. So we have the processes in place to give kids a vision and a taste of ministry. That's youth conference, travel teams, and urban centers. And then we have a process in place to actually walk them into full-time vocational ministries. Get the education, study the Bible, like do it for real. Yeah. We have those processes in place, and then partner churches all over the country where they can do internships, residencies, and all those kind of things. alongside that track for full-time vocational ministry, we have another track of what we call passionate marketplace leaders. So if we're at youth conference and there's 2,000 kids, as an example, maybe 200 of those kids might raise their hands and say, I feel like maybe God's calling me into full-time ministry. We're going to work with those kids. We're going to have 1,000 kids who say, I don't feel called to full-time ministry, but I love Jesus and I love the local church, and I could envision myself as a teacher, a discipler, an elder, a worship leader in that local church. Can you help me with that? And to that end, we developed what we called Momentum Marketplace. And it's teaching and discipling kids how to be passionate marketplace leaders while being passionate about the local church.
Yep.
And seeing God work in those local churches as well.
Yep.
And so we connect them with mentors. It's this really neat thing. It's on our website. You guys should check it out. But all of that is geared to trying to address these problems. Like, we have to have leaders. We have to have people who are passionate to give themselves to the work of Christ through his plan, which is called the local church.
Yep.
And that plan, if you take a healthy local church, what you're going to find is you're going to find a vocational leader, a pastor, who is unified with vocational marketplace leaders. That's called a pastor and an elder team, or a pastor and a leadership group. And that's going to be at the core of every healthy local church. We're trying to facilitate that core.
Yep.
And to help lead, envision, and train young men and women to do that. Now, we also, one of my other passions is I am a pastor. So I don't just have a heart for a local church, I lead one. And so I run Momentum, and actually mostly Eric runs Momentum, and I just come in and take the credit for all of his hard work on everything. Yeah, let's just be honest about it, Eric. That's the way it works. But I oversee Momentum. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. I oversee Momentum. But my full-time job is leading a local church. And so I'm also look and say, if I can help other pastors be better at pastoring. And so this is in the youth ministry world, and this is think of it as the senior pastor or campus pastor world. Like, we're all on a knife's edge all the time of exhaustion, of needing new ideas, of opportunity. That's why we created Momentum Pro.
Yep. So
Momentum Pro, we would gather those guys a couple times a year, surround them with encouragers and give them access to help. Like, we just took them out to Southern California on a 2-day retreat. We brought in a guy who specializes in assimilation, and we heard from him. And then myself and Keith Manier, who both lead very large churches, we did everything from like leadership talks to how to deal with staff to processes to discipleship programs to preaching series, just giving those ideas and those ministries to those existing pastors.
Yep.
So that's what Momentum Ministry Partners does. We're trying to create the leadership in partnership with local church. Everything is local church for us. And then we're trying to support and encourage the leadership that's in place. Eric, you lead that with the youth ministry side.
Yep.
What'd you guys do this last?
We went to Southern California too.
Okay.
We took about 18 youth pastors out there, and we had time with in our cohorts in those roundtable discussions to network, share ideas. But we brought in a gal named Trisha Lee. She's the next gen leader at a church in inner city LA. So they were one of the fastest growing churches in the country. And then COVID took a major hit on their church. And so they've rebounded, and she shared how what they were doing to reach out to their children, their youth, their parents. So some good ideas there. And then we spent half the morning with the Saddleback youth ministry team. They're youth pastors at their different campuses, and we learned a ton from them about what they're doing that works, what they've learned that didn't work, and what they're doing in some of the things that are cutting edge, even with mental health, and dealing with teenagers and helping them understand how to actually get wise counsel and navigate all of that. And so it's I think for the youth pastors, the value add, probably senior pastors too, is a lot of the networking and the getting to be together and hanging out and sharing ideas. And hey, we're trying to figure out how to do small groups. How have you done it? What works and what didn't work? And it's a lot of that networking and the connecting that adds value where you're not alone, and you realize oh man, probably half of the youth pastors that were at Saddleback, they were like, this is actually very affirming to hear that we're on the right track, that we're not screwing this all up.
Well, the whole world changed.
Yes.
And so everybody's trying to, I wouldn't even say play catch up.
Right.
Because I don't think we're behind. I think the puzzle got thrown off the table.
Yep.
And then you're putting it back together, but it forms a different picture than it used to.
Yes.
So everybody's looking for those pieces. That is the senior side as well. Networking is always awesome. Having a buddy is huge, but it's a lot of idea sharing. A lot of we tried this, we tried that didn't work. This is working. A lot of the understanding of getting our head around culture, because the church took a kick in the teeth, and the church got pushed further to the margin than it would have already. Now, this is what I'll say. I'll never forget about a few years ago, I was listening to some podcast, and there was a guy in Europe talking about the evangelical church. He said, if there's any hope for the evangelical church in the world, it has to come from the United States. And I was like, that's interesting. And so I was listening, and what he said was, the reason that is because Americans are entrepreneurs. You'll bounce off of a wall and start looking for another way around it. And he's like, Europeans and others aren't that way as much. And I thought that's a really interesting thing. It was a nice compliment. It's not because we have all the answers.
Yeah.
It's because we generally think differently. We kind of don't take no for an answer.
I was going to say we're stubborn.
We're stubborn, yeah. And so
in a good way. Yeah.
That's what I see is happening. And I'm like, that's really encouraging. There's some fight out there. That's why you're seeing mega churches become mega movements is we're reinventing. So I have a campus that only has 25 people in it. So it's not everything's big, it's no, we're reinventing how to do this, because we're not going to walk away from that inner city neighborhood, but everybody knows we have to do this differently than we did it in the past.
Right.
And that's true in the suburbs, that's true in the cities, it's true in youth ministry, it's true in adult ministry. Momentum Ministry Partners stirs that pot, and brings resources, brings pathways where necessary. So you gotta, when I grew up, I went to a church of maybe 100 people. What was fascinating is, out of that church of 100 people, I think there was 4 pastors that came out of it. And so Momentum Ministry Partners just looks and says, I don't care, it doesn't matter to me what size your church is, but you might look and say, I got some kids that pastors, missionaries, directors, men and women, I got some kids that I think God has a call in their life. I'm a solo pastor or 2-man team. I don't have the ability, and we're like, we will help with that. Because what's weird about Momentum, we don't own your kids or your church. We really do just pull up beside you. We're not creating our own, let's get your people drawn in so they buy our products and do our things. That's not how we work. We do training, we do experiences, and then we facilitate things. The value for local leaders and parents and lay leaders is that we're able to do things you can't just do on your own. But where it really clicks for you is we return that person to you.
Right.
We're not holding on to them.
Yep.
And we don't think of them as our own, right?
Yeah.
We think of ourselves as a conduit for all that stuff.
Yeah, all of our ministries are kind of aligned with that in mind. Like when I look at this and the things that I get most excited about, it is that like leadership development. It's probably why I said yes to doing this role, because
It's okay that you just... It's okay that you wanted to be my best friend.
Jeff and I had played this game for years where I would ask you to come speak at our retreat, and you'd say no, and then you'd ask me to come be a campus pastor, and I'd say, "Is it in Ohio?" And you'd say yes, and then I'd say no.
This is a true story he is telling.
But I think when you called, actually, you said, "Yes, I am going to offer you a job. Just listen." I think that's the first thing you said on the call. But,
yeah, I probably did.
So, but like the thing that resonated to me is like in all my years of pastoring, like what I was most passionate about and where I felt like God used me the most was in this idea of like developing other leaders. And Jeff, like when we've used this example before, like if this were not the church, if we were not talking about pastors, we were talking about electricians. The government, if they're looking at these stats being true in the next 5 to 10 years of electricians,
it'd be a national crisis.
They'd be funneling every resource possible to people to go be an electrician. And so what the church is kind of like out of luck on is there's not like a government movement behind like to say, let's provide resources. And for you and I, even looking at like the pastoral stock right now, there's a ton of resources for when you burn out. There's all kinds of resources for when you blow up your marriage or your ministry. But I'm like, well, what resources are there to keep you healthy and thriving and to help you develop more leaders? There's not a lot.
And you're exactly right. And that's the void. Now, I want everybody to know, and I'm glad there's those resources.
Yes, 100%.
What we found is there's very few resources, if any, who are calling you into full-time ministry as a high school kid. And the Christian colleges and the Bible colleges that would have done that are closing rapidly. Mm-hmm. So there's very few that value that. Now, we partner with Grace Schools in Winona Lake, Indiana. They value that.
Yes,
and so they're like, we will work hard and bend over backwards to help you provide the education. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
They are a liberal arts school, so that you can do pre-med, everything there. But they looked and said, this is a crisis. We want to be a part of it. We're with you. And so we work with them.
Yeah.
The seminaries are closing rapidly. Nobody wants to go. Well, Grace Seminary, who is obviously tied to Grace Schools, they looked and said, no, we value what you're doing. We're with you. We're in. Like, how can we do? So we found these partners that we can walk. When I went in the ministry, I would have expressed, it's a long story, I don't want to go into all of it, but I would have expressed interest in ministry in high school. Nobody, not one person, except my brother, who was a pastor, Dave Bogue, except my brother, nobody encouraged that. Nobody. In fact, when I went to school and said, I think I want to be a pastor, what they said to me was, you should get a Bible minor and like a real degree so that when that itch goes away. So we're looking and saying, if you can decide to be an engineer or a doctor or go into the military at 16, 17, you absolutely, you decide to be a nurse when you're 18, you can absolutely go into ministry.
Right.
We encourage it, and we give you a discipleship and training pathway to go down it. That was missing. Yeah. On the other side of that spectrum for pastors, what was missing was, like you said, if my church is in decline, if I'm not sure what to do, like there's a lot of resources, and praise God.
Yeah.
What was missing was my church is on the grow. I went from 50 people to 75 people. I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah.
And we're like, there's nobody to call. I'm too small. I can't. Andy Sandley isn't going to pick up my call.
Right.
I go to a major conference, and I can hear information, but I can't process it with anybody. So all we have done at Momentum, we don't put on a major conference. We just created those tables and those relationships. So you're sitting down with a guy who pastors a church of 20,000 people, and you have grown from 50 to 75, and that guy is helping you think through.
Yep.
It's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And it gives life and it gives vitality. To your point, the networking happens, all the rest.
Yeah.
And then we also bring in that guy's got a great idea. We should all hear about that book you wrote. And then we just bring that guy to the table.
Yeah.
So it's this ecosystem to address this pastoral crisis. And I just looked at the board and Heidi and my elders here at Grace. I'm like, guys, we have an opportunity. I don't know what to do. If people don't step up and do something.
Yep.
And when I called you, I was like, Eric, somebody's got to step in. I knew this is your passion. You want to go. And so Eric and Bethany are like, yeah, we'll give it a shot. I don't know that. I don't think we're the end all to be all, but
Right.
if we're going down, I'm going down swinging, man.
Yep.
And God gave us this wonderful heritage that used to be called CE National. We both were discipled by wonderful people like TK and Ed Lewis and others. And I'm like, well, we're the grown-ups now.
Yeah.
And Dad said,
Right.
do something with the business.
Yep.
So we're like, let's use it all for what it was built for, and here we sit.
Jeff, it's interesting to hear your perspective of being a high school student and having that call and not knowing how to take those steps. From my perspective, I've had students that I looked at and I'm like, you should be a youth pastor.
Yep.
And they're like, no, I want to be an engineer. I'm like, no, you should be a youth pastor. And they're like, no, I want to go to West Virginia University and be an engineer. I'm like, you're going to get eaten alive, and you should be you should go to a Christian school and be a youth pastor. And they pursued that route, and I would I was nervous for them, but I also didn't have this other side of what we're doing with Momentum Marketplace to help them understand. And now to look at those are phenomenal resources that we can give to pastors, to youth pastors, where we're trying to help you look at yourself and the people that you're influencing as multipliers. And not just to look at those students, but how do you help them live in such a way as to make Jesus make sense wherever they go?
The call to be an engineer is as valid as the call to be a youth pastor.
Yep.
They're different. And so when a kid says, no, I'm like, great. How do you walk with Jesus, love the local church, and make an impact in your as an engineer? It's the exact same thing we say to the kid who says, I want to be a pastor, a missionary, or a director.
Correct.
Right? So it's not elevating one over the other. It's actually firing both.
Yeah.
And when you look at the core of a leadership group in a local church, what you find is both of those things unified together is what makes it healthy. And we need all of that. We don't need more people attending church.
Right.
We need more people leading transformational churches. And that's why the local church. I read the book a bunch of times. It always is Jesus's plan.
Yep.
And so we're just trying to pour fuel on that fire.
Yeah, it's fun when we're seeing, I think we're in circles where we're constantly asking these pastors what are the biggest problems that you're trying to solve? Because we want to give resources to you, and in doing that, we want to partner with you well. But the other side of some of the light bulb moments for these guys is when they're viewing those marketplace leaders differently. They're not looking at them as a means to financially fund the church, but they're viewing them as significant ministry partners because they value their mind and their heart as well.
This is
That's
huge.
a big deal.
What Eric just said is huge, guys. As you're listening to this, just yesterday I came across an organizational problem at Grace. I don't know what to do. I texted my friend, who is the CEO of an extremely large company whose name you would recognize if I said it out loud. And I went home and I told Heidi, I said, isn't it amazing that here I am, a pastor, and I have a problem. And the way that the body of Christ works is I literally can text the one of the people on planet Earth who would be the most expert in this problem, and ask him a question. And we're trying to get a phone call on Friday. But I'm like, as a pastor, I'm like, that's the power of that resource. And my friend is like, absolutely. When can I help? Like, he's eager to help me because he knows he can. That's the wonder of it. And you start unlocking and unleashing things like that. Now, he happens to be a CEO of a big company. I have another friend, one of my closest friends is a farmer. And I don't make big decisions without talking to him first, because he, no pun intended, brings horse sense to me. And like, he is an incredible leader, incredibly wise guy. But I also have, like, everything I need as a pastor is in the local church. It's usually, this is probably another episode now, so I won't go too long there, but they're usually waiting to be asked and unlocked because they love Jesus and they love Jesus' church as much as the pastor does. And when you start unlocking that vocational minister with that passionate marketplace leader, you just start getting something dynamic going, and that's what we're trying to do. Well,
Jeff, I'm making a note to have that be a future episode.
There
Probably
you go.
the other side of this conversation that we've run out of time and haven't even got into is, how do you as pastors stay healthy and avoid burnout? And so we can talk about that.
That's another episode.
That's for sure another episode. Well, our whole goal in all of this is to let you know, as ministry leaders, that we're here. We want to be a resource to you. That's our heartbeat. That's why we exist as an organization. This podcast is actually in line with that. That's why we do the interviews and the conversations and the topics that we try and tackle, because we want to be that resource to you to help you have a new idea or have fresh perspective on something, or think outside the box in a way. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If there's a way that we can serve and come alongside of you, reach out to us, let us know. We'd be honored to do that. And I will make sure that we put in the episode show notes the link to that Barna resource that you were talking about, the article, if you want to dig deeper in that, and as always, our Momentum website too. So thanks so much for tuning in.
Well, guys, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'd be really honored if you went ahead and subscribed to the podcast, and that way you can just kind of stay up to date with the episodes that we're posting in the future. To learn more about Momentum Ministry Partners and our many other resources, please be sure to follow us on social media at Momentum Ministry Partners, or check out our website, www.buildmomentum.org.